Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of the Free Full Stack course. In this chapter, we're going to set up Django's REST framework for our backend. Up to this point, we've been kind of preparing our backend, setting up Python and our virtual environment and some of the dependencies, but we haven't really gone into developing our backend. From this chapter on, we're going to focus solely on that. We may have to jump sometimes from developing the backend to actually work with some other stuff. So for instance, we may even have to bring in some postman, for instance, to test our backend, etc. But the main focus is going to be developing our backend, and especially with Django's REST framework. So what is DRF? Django's REST framework is, as it is mentioned on their website, is a toolkit for building web APIs. Now, something that a lot of developers get confused when they start with Django is, okay, so if DRF is for developing web APIs, then what is Django? Django, you could say it is a framework for developing web applications generally. It can be websites, it can be APIs, etc. It can even be services. So Django itself is a lot of the times used for developing complete websites, and it has a very good ORM as well for working with the data, so you don't have to manually manage your, for instance, SQL data, whether it is PSQL or whatever it is. In this course, we're using Postgres, of course. So it is a very easy web framework for developing web applications, and that's why a lot of people and developers actually use Django, because you get started really fast, you learn it fast, and you can also develop your applications very, very rapidly. In this course, we're not going to use Django for developing a website, but we're actually going to use it for creating our REST APIs. And of course, you can always go ahead and use pure Django and kind of like bend the rules of Django to create like some REST APIs. However, there's already a toolkit called DRF, or a framework called DRF, Django's REST framework, or Django REST framework. And this framework, it basically comes with pretty much everything that you need out the box in order to support and create REST APIs. So let me just do some screen reshuffling in here and show you perhaps the website for Django's REST framework. So if I do this, perhaps then you can see the screen a little bit better. So here is the website that is dedicated to DRF, Django REST framework. Okay. And at the moment, at the time of recording this video, this website resides at django-rest-framework.org. And we can go here to the main page, which is right here, basically, you can see. You can read more about it. You can also fund this project if you want to, but I suggest that first you use it. And if you actually like the framework, which is something we're going to do in this course. Basically, we're going to develop this entire backend on Django's REST framework. So I hope that you're going to like it. But you can also fund the project if you want to. So what we're going to do here is to go through the installation process of Django REST framework on our backend. So remember, our backend at the moment is pure Django. So we're just using a web framework called Django. And we're then going to build Django REST framework on top of our Django backend. And there's a section in here. So if I increase the size of the screen, there's a section in here called install or installation. And you need to basically click there on this section to follow along with the installation process. But that's what we're going to do here. So what we're going to do here is to go ahead and activate our virtual environment first. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code in here, and this is our course backend. Now, I have to explain this also. I had to rename this folder to course backend. You don't have to at all, and I actually suggest that you don't. So just leave the folder the way you had it. Nothing's changed for you. But if you see this folder called course backend in here, just know that it is the backend, basically, code that you have on your computer as well, probably under a different name. The reason I had to change this name is that I need to have 2 copies of this course backend, because while I'm actually creating this course for you, I'm also doing actually basically creating the code as well, writing the code as well. So I need to have a copy for me and a copy for you. Otherwise, if I go ahead and change the copy that I present during the recording process and go ahead like months ahead and add many commits to this code and change the code a lot, it's going to be very difficult for me then to go back to a specific commit and show you the state of the code and then build on top of that. So I have to have one copy for me where I develop the course. I keep developing the course as a private copy. Then I have another copy in here called course backend, where I basically, it's basically the course. I present that to you. So if you see this name course backend, just don't worry about it. It's the same backend that we've been developing so far. Nothing has changed. It is the exact same thing. So, and if you look at, for instance, the git commit in here, we see git log. You can see we still have our step 1 commit in here, which was committed 9th of July. Okay, so that's where we basically left things. All right. So what we're going to do in here is to first make sure that we have our virtual environment activated. And the way I usually do this is, first of all, I look at the prompt here. If you have a virtual environment activated, you usually have your prompt changed with a prefix of the name of your virtual environment, in this case, DRF backend. If you remember, that's how we created the virtual environment for our backend. But I don't see that right here. So it kind of indicates to me that I don't have my virtual environment activated. This could be due to a lot of reasons. For instance, I may have closed Visual Studio Code, or I may have restarted my computer and then Visual Studio Code just got restored and the virtual environment was not restored. So it could be due to many, many reasons. And I don't know myself the reason. I just know that I have updated my Mac between the last time I recorded a video for this course and this time. So it is very much possible that it is due to that. But however, another way that you can check whether your virtual environment is activated or not is by checking the version of Python. So if you say Python version, I can see 3.10.2, but if I remember correctly, for this course, we were using 3.10.0. And you may actually have picked another version for your virtual environment. That's completely fine as long as it's 3.10 something, okay? It could be even 3.10.4, I believe it's available. But I remember that I picked 3.10.0, and I can see that that is not the version that's being displayed right here. So something is wrong. My virtual environment is not activated. So what I have to do in here is say pyenv, if I can spell it, and then I'm going to say activate DRF backend. Okay. And I can see now DRF backend is shown as a prefix in here. So if I say Python version, I should have 3.10.0. Now, if you're a user using Windows, I have been made aware by a lot of you in the comment section that pyenv fork on Windows does not have support for virtual environments, and you need to basically use Python's virtual environments directly in order to get access to virtual environments. So if that's the case, then you're not going to be able to use what I just used, pyenv activate. You just need to use Python directly to activate your virtual environment. But if you're a Windows user and you've come along to this, come so far to this video, then you most definitely have made it already, and you know how to work with virtual environments. I thought to make a separate video for Windows users to teach how to activate virtual environments, but a very kind user, basically made a comment in one of my previous videos where we were talking about virtual environments on Windows, and he explained for Windows users how to do that process. So I've sticky that comment, so it's on top of or actually pinned it. That comment is on top of the other comments. So if you're a Windows user, I highly suggest that you actually have a look at the comment to get an understanding of how to activate and work with virtual environments with Python on Windows. Okay, so now we've activated our virtual environment. I can see DRF backend is activated in here, so we're good to go. And if I say which Python, it should come from my, it's from Shins actually. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So what we need to do here is to go ahead and install Django REST Framework as a dependency. So if you look on their website, they say you have to use pip install Django REST Framework. So I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to paste it in there. Okay, so Django REST Framework is installed successfully. Then I'm going to install Markdown, and the reason we have these additional pip dependencies is because Django REST Framework will give you some browsable APIs. It's a very nice UI. It's kind of like Open API. So by us developing new APIs, you will always get like free browsable API documentation later. So anyone can hit your APIs as long as the APIs are open, and then it can get some documentations on them, what the parameters are, what the return values are, whether it has authentication or not. So it's if you're familiar with Swagger, for instance, or OpenAPI as it is called now, then you probably already know what OpenAPI's documentations look like. So what this markdown additional dependency and the Django filters will give you is kind of the support for that kind of open documentation. Okay, but don't worry about it for now. If you don't understand that, that's completely fine. These are just some dependencies that you have to install for in order to be able to install Django REST Framework. Okay, so I'm just going to copy pip install markdown. I'm going to bring it here and let's install that. Great. So actually, before we do that, I needed to discuss this. So while you're using pip, you will see that sometimes when you're like at the moment our Python version is 3.10.0. For you, it may be 3.10.2 or 3.10.4. But as you're using pip, you will sometimes get a message saying that, oh, and your version of pip is available. Do you want to upgrade? And this is a little bit, I understand it's a little bit strange, because if you're like working with virtual environments, you kind of want to lock even your pip version, but pip's versioning is kind of different. It's outside our control. So even if your Python version is 3.10.0 or 3.10.2, pip could have its own versioning. So if you get a message saying that, oh, after installing Django REST Framework with pip, if you get a message saying that a newer version of pip is available, please go ahead and actually upgrade your pip. And you can do that with Python module pip install upgrade pip, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. But I didn't get that message because I've already installed the latest version of pip, so I don't have to do that. Okay. So after upgrading pip, if you were prompted to do that, you don't have to do that if you weren't prompted for it. And you need to install markdown. So let's say pip install markdown. Okay. So now that is installed. And then we're going to go ahead and install Django filter in here. So I'm going to copy this and bring it to Visual Studio Code's terminal. And that is also installed. Okay. So if you follow along with the rest of the installation steps in here, we can skip this one because there's an or. So either you do this or you do this, which I suggest that you actually do the first one. So we skip over that one, and then we're going to go in here and add REST framework to our installed apps. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about installed apps in the future, but what installed apps is a section inside your settings Python file, and it really tells Django which applications are available as a resource to it. So before I make it too complicated, let's go to settings.py in here and find installed apps. You can see in here, by default, Django comes with some apps, and you can see Django contrib admin, auth, blah, blah. Now, if you add an application in here, you're basically telling Django that, hey, I need you to go and find this application and load that application when my server is running. Okay, so that's all we need to know for now. By us telling Django that, actually, let me bring the title in here. So we're going to install REST Framework as an install application. And what that really means is that we're telling Django that, hey, we have now a dependency or an application available as part of this server called REST Framework or REST_framework, as it's mentioned here. And we need Django to load that into memory when our server is running. So all the resources and all the scripts that that particular application has to be loaded into our server. And what that really enables our server then to do is literally it turns our server into like a REST API backend. It is a lot of magic going on in there, and you will get to know more about install applications as we go on as well, because right after this chapter, we're actually going to add some new applications of our own to installed apps. So then I think the coin will drop, and for a lot of us watching this course, what an application actually is in Django. But for now, let's just go ahead and follow the instructions in here. So let's copy this REST_framework, and let's go to the installed apps section of your settings.py, and then add a new item in here, and we're just gonna call it REST framework. Okay, I'm gonna save this file. Great stuff. Now, what we're going to do is go to um, adding some URLs to our application, because if you see in here, the next step is actually says go to your urls.py file, and let's actually do that. urls.py. You can see it is inside the backend folder. Because when you create a new, we have this backend folder simply because when you create a new Django project, Django basically creates a new kind of application for you with the name that you provided when you created your application, or you created your project. So here it's called backend, and that backend has a file called urls.py. This is like the root URL for, this is the root file for all the URLs. It's kind of difficult to explain it. How I usually think about it is that Django doesn't know really what APIs you're going to have, what URLs or what views, what websites, what pages you're going to have. And the way to do that is it goes to your main application in here, backend, and it literally loads this URL patterns. Okay, so at the moment, our Django application, the only thing it knows is that it has a URL called admin /. That's the only thing our backend has at the moment. It doesn't even have like the index page, nothing. So what we need to do is to tell it that, hey, we want to have some magic URLs that the REST framework provides us for authentication. So if you go in here, you can see that you're suggested to provide this or take this line of code and paste it into your URL patterns. And we're going to just do exactly that. However, we're going to change this API auth to auth. And this is just a naming convention. What I suggest, and I always tell people who I'm teaching Django to, is it's nice to not have dashes, because dashes make things a little bit more complicated in URL. So what we're going to have is, as you hit our backend on localhost, for instance, localhost 8000 /auth/. For me, that's a lot nicer than API auth. However, if you have a backend like a website, so you have a website with lots of pages, and then a user can log into your website with an HTML page, then you may want to have like an API auth, and then you may want to have a web auth, something like that. So web auth is where users go and authenticate into your website, and API auth is where people can actually log into your APIs. So I understand this can be kind of confusing to start with, because if you're not familiar with Django, this may not make so much sense to you. But for now, just know that there's a URL patterns, and we're just going to have a /auth in our URL, or auth/ in our URL patterns. We're getting a lot of warnings in here, and that's because our Python interpreter hasn't been selected. So let's see if I can actually do that. Select interpreter and see DRF backend. So let's choose DRF backend in there. Okay, so what we need to also do is to make sure that this include is available to our application. What I usually do in Visual Studio Code is to press Command dot in Mac or Control dot on Linux and Windows, and then say add from Django URLs. And you can see it will be imported from here. Okay, so now you have include available. You don't really have to think so much about it right now, but as we get more advanced with Django and Django REST Framework, I will teach you what these actually mean and how they work. Okay, but for now, let's just save this file. Good stuff. So what we're going to do then is to, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, now that we've done that, we're going to run our server. So let's go to our terminal, ensure that our virtual environment is activated in here. Then I'm going to run our server. So Python manage.py and run server. Okay, I can see our server is now running successfully. Then I'm going to bring up Safari in here. And it's going to say localhost 8000. You can see by hitting 8000, what's happening in here is that Django is going to your backend urls.py. So it's going here in urls.py. And it is looking at the URLs available. It's like, okay, what URL you have provided is just nothing. So it's literally just a /. And then goes in here and says, is there any URL available called /? No, it's not. Then it gives us an error. What it does, though, is that it gives us debug information. And it says, oh, I have two other URLs available, admin and auth. So I don't have / available, but I have these guys available, okay? So what we're going to do is to basically look at /auth. So let's go ahead in here and say that, okay, we want to log in. So we're going to say auth/login. Now, all of a sudden, you see that you're presented with a nice, nice, how do you say it, a web page basically to log in. And you can provide a username and a password. Now, we don't have a user yet to actually log in. I'm getting a suggestion here for admin, and that's because I'm actually testing stuff as I'm creating the course for you. So I have created a user called admin for localhost and not for exactly this server. The server doesn't have a user yet. So I'm not going to be able to log in with that user, but it's just saved in my Safari, and that's why I'm getting this suggestion. So you can see now we have a login URL in here, which is auth/login. And also you will have a logout URL because if you go back to your URLs, auth in REST framework provides that for you. So if you just type this logout in here, you can see logout. Thanks for spending some quality time with the website today. Okay, so now you have those two URLs available, login and logout, and that's all we have to be concerned with right now. Now, we don't have a user, as I mentioned, so there is a concept of users and authentication, of course, and I completely understand that these things could be very confusing to begin with when you're getting started with Django and web and backend development. I remember that I was super confused about all these URLs, where they lead, what they have to do with our APIs, how the user is going to log into the API, etc. I'm going to take these things very slowly in this course. So we're going to go through them, and I'm just going to make sure that they're not as painful to you as they were for me when I was getting started with Django. So I'm just going to break them down one step at a time, but we're not going to jump into everything at once. So don't worry about that. We don't have a user to log in with right now, but before we do the user creation and actually logging in with the user, I need to explain quite a lot what users are in Django, how they work, what they have to do with JWT tokens. Lots to explain, but if we do it all at once, then we could run the risk of confusing a lot of watchers. So let's not do that at the moment, okay? Now, there is a lot more to DRF and basically Django's REST framework. We have just scratched the surface. There's a lot to talk about, but I don't want as I mentioned, I don't want things to get confusing to start with. So let's just take it slowly. I think it's a great achievement that we have done so far. We've installed DRF and we actually have two APIs, a login and a logout. So let's just leave it at that. But DRF has a lot of great features that we're going to take advantage of, such as serializers and views. So let's just keep that in mind, that it's good to actually read the documentations for DRF and see how things work if you're curious. But even if you don't want to do that, we're going to go through that in the coming chapters, okay? So what we need to also understand is that most parts of our final API don't need authentication. So if what we're going to do is to create some sort of an e-commerce website where people can come in and just download our application that we're going to later write with Flutter and browse basically categories of products, go into product sites, go into product pages, which we're going to provide the details for through our API. And then they're going to look at some images, read the descriptions, maybe read some reviews, and then add it to their cart. And then when it comes to actually checking out, or maybe when it comes to managing their cart, then we're going to ask them to log in. So it's kind of going to be working like Amazon or eBay. You don't necessarily have to have a user in order to interact with our final product. And that's something that we need to be aware of when developing our APIs. When we develop the APIs, for instance, for providing user with categories of products or products in specific categories, then we don't want those APIs to be behind authentication, because that means if they're behind authentication, it means unauthenticated users cannot actually use our final Flutter application. So Some parts of our REST API need to be behind authentication, for instance, when you're trying to check out. But I know some other websites don't even require you to log in. They just allow you to anonymously check out. So we're going to make these decisions as we go. But just know that for now, there is a concept of users and like how to manage data in Django and also how users log into our system. But so it could be quite confusing. But for now, let's just forget all about that. We don't need any users. Most of our APIs are going to be open. And when it comes to creating users, I'll explain all of that to you and what it means to our solution. Okay. So what we're going to do probably in this backend is that the purchasing part we're going to put behind some sort of like a kind of a user firewall. In that, if you want to purchase something, then you have to create an account, and then you have a basket, etc., and then you can check out. And then we're going to use Stripe perhaps for this backend. So, but the rest of the APIs are going to be open. So with all that said, let's go to our Visual Studio Code in here, and I'm going to stop the server with Control-C. I think it's Control-C. And let's just commit our code. So if we have a look in here, we have git log, step 1, and then I'm going to say git commit amend, add with a message, and then I'm going to say step 2, okay, git status, everything is basically added, and then I'm going to say git push. Okay, so that's a git push. Great stuff. So now we have 2 commits in our repository. So I just want to say a big congratulations to you for making it so far. And now you have a backend set up with Django REST Framework, but we're only getting started. So there is a lot more to do, and I hope to see you in the next chapter.